So I got it all set up. I just got done with an 8-minute mix of the first set, and I'm gonna do the pour right now. So I did an A and B, got it mixed up with the stick, and we're gonna see what we got after cleaning the table. I just poured on my second batch on top of it. It's dripping off. I'm going through and I'm coating through with it. Then I'm gonna hit it with the torch. So I'm getting down to my 1/4 inch. I got my 1/4 inch spatula. So we mixed for 8 minutes each lightly and got rid of the clouds when we did it. And now I've just got to go around the edges and stuff like that and make sure I'm getting a nice even waterfall over the edges for myself. I'm done with my pour and my leveling. I've been doing it for about 15-20 minutes. I've taken it down to a 1/4 inch with my 1/4 inch spatula, and definitely walking around the table, I've gotten something on my shoes, so I've taken my shoes off and took my socks off, as I got some on there too now. So now it's just a matter of circling, making sure you got enough room. And then I'm going to come through here right now and use the torch on this thing. So I'm down to a 1/4 inch. It is 4 o'clock. It's about 78 degrees in the house, so it should be prime weather for this. The bottles were set, and so I did a temp on them before I did them, and they were at 75 degrees. So they're in good shape when I put them and mixed them. So now I'm just going to come in here and torch this real quick. And I've got tape underneath on the bottoms all the way along the bottom. And there's definitely a lot of overrun on here, and it's still draining off of this thing. So it is level, but there's a lot of drainage. You can't tell it, but this whole area here where it's kind of dark and there's the shimmy there, that whole area is epoxy all the way around, and my foot sticks because it came through my sock a little bit. Okay, and it is A and B. It's magic resin. And this is the tabletop epoxy that we did. And I used 3.5 gallons so that I'd have extra. That's 4 gallons right there. I used 3.5 gallons of it so that I could overload the sides, because I accommodated the sides. And so hopefully the sides will help to seal what I got. Again, I'm gonna let it go here a little bit, and now I'm just gonna hit it with the torch. You can't see any bubbles much, but there are some bubbles in there. So far so good. We'll see what we get here. Okay, we just hit her with the torch. It's hard for you to tell from the pictures here, but it's got a nice, there you got some there. It's got a nice glass looking appearance. So I can see them again. I got some more bubbles there. Still draining off the sides. 1/4 inch thick. Hopefully she'll hold for what her purpose was. And I'm gonna hit it again with the torch here in just a few minutes. Again, it's definitely where you wanna make sure you got it for my particular thing with my 80-inch table by 42-inch wide. For what we did at a 1/4 inch, it definitely had enough of an overload. I probably mixed too much. Thought I'd need more on the sides for how it would overflow. So I wouldn't need that much so that it comes clear out. So it's harder to get around the table when it's that much type of a thing. And it's definitely, you got to keep it off your shoes and stuff so it doesn't get on the floor. So definitely something that would be nice in a shop. Make sure you got it wide enough painter's tarp down or something underneath you so that you can get around it type of thing. But don't put too much material on, because then you just got to keep brushing it off to get to your appropriate width, or thickness I should say, that you are trying to do. When I mixed, I actually mixed 2 gallons at a time, 2 gallons to start with, and then 1.5 gallons the second round, just because of the size of the pail. So I put 2 gallons in a 3.5 gallon home improvement store pail, and then took a paint stick and I actually stirred for 8 minutes. And at about 6 minutes, all the cloudiness had gone away, but I kept going. The instructions were different in what was included with the material when I got it from the manufacturer than what it actually said on their website. In one area, it says that you should go from 5 to 8 minutes. This said you only needed to do for 5 minutes. Another area said that the instructions that came with the material in the package said this wouldn't set for 30 minutes, so you had 30 minutes time to do everything you had to do. In the manual on the online website, it said 20 minutes, so there's some discrepancy there. So I kind of cut the difference. So like I say, when you stir, you want to stir until all the cloudiness goes away in the material. Don't stir too fast. You create a lot of air bubbles. Just have a nice, steady, even flow when you're stirring, and your hand will get tired. So make sure you got yourself in a good spot so that you can do your 5 to 8 minutes and just stir consistently, get around the edges, stir it in, reverse your stir, and then stir up and down inside of whatever bucket you got so that you can kind of stir the center. So don't just continue to go around the edge because it'll just make a swirl and the material just sits in the center. You need to kind of cut it apart basically with whatever you're doing. So back and forth, and then around and around, and then around and around again the other way, and then kind of back and forth again. So keep doing that type of a stir to get it nice and mixed up. The stir is really important, that you get it stirred right and get rid of that cloud. That means it's in there. And if you look down in your bucket or whatever it is that you're stirring it in, you can actually see the different materials. The B material should go in first, and then you pour the A material on top. The A material is way thicker. So when you pour that in, it kind of glopes out, at least out of these gallon jugs it did. So you got to get that in there, and it actually, it looked like a liquid Drano almost, where it got in there and it just kind of sat. So you need to just stir all that around. So definitely keep that in mind when you're doing that. Get a stick or get appropriate sticks. So get some spares for yourself so you can throw them away. You definitely want to use gloves. If you get anything on you, you can use some acetane to get it off real quick. But it definitely, it's like super glue on your fingers as far as the stickiness factor, and then, sealing up your fingers. So make sure you wear some gloves. And then the spatulas that you can use some type of a spatula that's got the widths on it. This is a 1/4 inch one here. There's some discrepancy again in the manufacturer's notes on this stuff. In what came with the material, it says that you can go up to 1/4 inch pours. On the online for this tabletop epoxy, for what they've got, they said that you can't go over 1/8 of an inch pour at a time, and then you would need, if you do over 1/8 of an inch, you got to do another pour. So I went with the 1/4 inch pour, so I hope that's the correct information, because that's what I've got on here is a 1/4 inch pour. Well, it's shining up real nice. So I'm going to hit it again here with the torch, make sure I got any of the bubbles out again. So right now it's about 25 minutes after the initial pour, and then I'm going to kind of let her sit. This is a slate table. So, and actually the reason that we're putting the epoxy on there is because some of the tiles had started to give way from the glue that they had, because the table was about 8 years old and we really like it. So we wanted to actually seal have something on there that would help to seal out the moisture and then actually hold the existing tiles down that may or may not have been loose. Say it's a 80 by 42 table. We did not seal coat it first. So a lot of the stuff talked about seal coating because you had the air pockets from the wood that would breathe through. Slate is a rock material. This is really thin slate, but it could still breathe. So there still could be some airflow through it that could come back and bite me for the fact that we didn't seal it first. But we were less concerned about there being air bubbles and the nature of what it looked like right now. If there's an air bubble in there that happens to come about itself in the next couple of hours that I can't get out, I'm less worried about that. Again, we were just trying to seal. Let's try to salvage the tiles for what it was and seal it down and give it a hard coat so that the stuff would survive. And I just gave it another hit with the torch, and it looks good. It's got a nice sheen to it. and it does level out fairly decently. You still need to, when you're pouring in this size of a pour, I can see in a smaller pour it would self-level really well. And I shouldn't say self-level, it would disperse itself out over an area. For something this large, you definitely need to, and they talk about it in the instructions, that if you have like a countertop or something like that, you want to start at one end and pour to the other. That is absolutely what you want to do with this thing too. I started in the middle and poured out. It actually went out some more in the centers for what it is. And then I actually had to come in with my second batch because I did 2 gallons to start with to mix in the 3.5 gallon buckets so that I could get a good stir. And then I did another 1.5 gallons. And once I got that done right afterwards, because I did 8-minute stir, poured it, started the next 8-minute stir so I could pour the next batch. And then I kind of rimmed around the outside edges. And then when I got that out, I let it waterfall over my edges because I wanted it on my edges. And then I actually took my hands with the gloves and I helped to bring the material out. And then I kind of edged it along to try to fill in any gaps or any dry spots and help it along so that it could actually break the hydraulic plane of trying to make over the waterfall. So I got rid of the dry spots because then it could actually flow. So then when I did that, it worked really well and everything else leveled out really nicely. It's slate, so it's actually uneven to start with, the table is. That was actually the initial contour of it. So this is actually gonna help probably square it up some, because there was a lot of little jags or stuff like that in there, which was a feature of the table. It's one of the reasons we liked it. But in turn, it creates water spots throughout time that they can sit in and stuff like that. So hopefully this will take care of what we're trying to do with it. So it has now been about 30 minutes past the initial pour and or the initial mix and pour type of thing. So I'm going to let it sit for about an hour now and kind of watch it and see if it needs another shot ever of the bubbles. And I'm not seeing a lot of bubbles like some people had talked about, that you really needed to be on it for a good half hour and watch for bubbles. I'm at my half hour mark now where it should be starting to firm up a little bit. I'm still getting some dripping, so it's not totally firmed up because there's still stuff dripping off of it here from the sides. And then I've got to figure out with me, and I've seen other videos from other epoxies where they had put the tape underneath so that way you didn't have to, as it started to dry, if you let it dry all the way on something like this where it's dripping over, then you've got to come in and absolutely sand it off if you let it fully dry. So some people were actually taking a putty knife and running it along the edge. I'd seen a number of people that had actually done like painter's tape underneath, and then they can just pull the painter's tape off, and then it just leaves a relatively clean edge, and you might have to come over and lightly sand a couple of the little marker spots or little jags that may create itself. But overall, you'll get rid of all that sharpness, because once it dries hard, and it's going to be you could be sharp with the little edges coming down and create a lot of work for you to do with the sander. So do something, if you're doing an overflow like this, so that you can actually get it. Again, you either come along with a spatula, something sharp, and kind of cut along the bottom as it gets firmer. Right now it's not at that spot yet because it's still dripping, or like I'm going to try it here, and I've never done it with the spatula. I've seen it looked pretty slick to do. Or you're going to come in here and do like the tape that I've got. So I've got to figure out when to pull that tape off. So I would imagine it's going to be probably in another hour or so before it gets too firm, but firm enough that I can get it off there before it gets where I'm going to have to fight the tape. It's hard to tell here, but when I scan across, I'm looking at the self-leveling. It's 1/4 inch thick, and I measured it with the little spade thing that has 1/4 inch notches on it. But there's definitely what looks like some areas, and it's hard probably to tell here. It's a little better. You can kind of see it. Like right there's a little bit, it almost looks like a high spot type of a thing, but we'll see. We'll see how she turns out now. It's been about 50 minutes after the initial pour. And it is still now in the house, and I poured it at 77 degrees. Got it set to 80, but it was, and the stuff was at 75 degrees with my thermal gun. So, but it's got a nice sheen to it, if you like that glassiness. It's still dripping after 50 minutes. You might be able to see that if you get a little better view of what the table looks like. come back, I'll probably look at it in about an hour here and see if it's where if it's stopped dripping and I can peel the tape. I don't know how long I want to leave the tape on where it actually stays, so I got to figure out where it's just too tacky, but not too tacky that the tape ends up getting stuck in the epoxy. And by the luck of it, 77 degrees in here, and then I actually have a ceiling fan overhead, so I'm running that right now. There is a little bit of odor inside of the side of where I've got everything opened up. So this is all opened up here air-wise, and it's a windier day, but it doesn't where the fumes are noxious, but it's enough. I wouldn't want to be in it for multiple hours without a little bit of air, for sure. It's now been 4 hours since the original pour, and I am going to attempt to take the tape off. See what that looks like. I've actually seen a couple of drips in the last time frame drop off this thing yet. It's got a nice sheen to it, but I haven't tested to see how tacky it is. So I'm going to take the tape off and see what I get 4 hours later. It's now been 5 hours since the pour, and at the 4 hour mark when I took tape off, yeah, that was too long. It should have come off at about hour 2, 2.5, depending on how tacky it was. So I spent about 30 minutes getting the tape off, which was still valuable because you could see all the little crystallites that hanging down that would have been terrible to try to sand off. So it was still worth it. But you definitely would want to take the tape off when it's not quite so hardened. So far, it seems pretty good. It's drying relatively fast. I'm in an 80-degree environment yet. I've got a fan running on it. So it's still tacky yet at 5 hours, and we'll see what it looks like tomorrow. It's been 16 hours since the original pour, and it came out pretty nice. I do have some bubbles that showed up over time. So it's definitely something that when I was at the 1.5 to 2 hour mark, there weren't any bubbles. I had gone through and torched it, but I had some bubbles appear, and a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that I didn't put a seal coat down. So I did not seal coat this initially to help take some of that out of there, but for my purposes, I'm okay with that. For somebody else and what they're doing with this on a bar table or something like that, they probably absolutely want to make sure they put a sealer down and get that on there first to avoid that. Right now, to the touch, it still feels almost soft per se. It might not be just because I'm not that familiar with it. It doesn't have its full hardness for sure. It doesn't feel like, but it's no longer tacky like it was yesterday evening when I filmed last.